4 men were sliding down the north face of the mountain on their backs, hands thrown out, clawing at snow that gave them nothing to hold. Above them, 2 more men had braced themselves against the rock, and between the falling and the saved there was one thing left, a single rope. And then the rope broke. For 160 years, one question has refused to die. Did that rope break, or did someone cut it? Welcome to the dark record. Today, we're not climbing a mountain. We're taking apart an accusation. Because what happened on the Matterhorn on the 14th of July, 1865, has 2 versions. In the first, it's the greatest triumph of the golden age of mountaineering, ending in a horrible accident. In the second, it's a murder in the sky, where 3 survivors let 4 men fall and cut the rope to save themselves. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what the evidence says. You'll know which parts are certain, which parts are contested, and which part no one to this day has ever been able to prove. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with a man who had already failed 7 times. By 1865, almost every great peak of the Alps had been conquered. Climbers had spent 2 decades ticking off summit after summit, the era historians call the golden age of mountaineering. And by then, only one prize was left, the most beautiful and the most feared mountain in Europe, the Matterhorn. It was believed to be unclimbable. Locals said that spirits guarded the summit, that anyone who reached the top would be thrown back down. In other words, the Matterhorn had the exact energy of the ring in Lord of the Rings, beautiful, magnetic, and absolutely convinced you shouldn't be touching it. One man refused to believe the rumors. Edward Whymper, an English illustrator, had thrown himself at this mountain 7 times. 7 times it had beaten him back. At this point, Whymper's relationship with the Matterhorn was less hobby and more the way Wile E. Coyote feels about the Roadrunner. Different plan every time, same result, total humiliation. In the summer of 1865, he tried again, this time from the Swiss side, from Zermatt. And this time, he wasn't alone. 7 men set out, Whymper, and with him a name that matters more than any other in this story, Michel Croz, a French guide from Chamonix, one of the finest, most experienced mountaineers alive. There was Charles Hudson, a respected English clergyman and climber. There was Lord Francis Douglas, a young aristocrat of 18. And there was Douglas Hadow, 19 years old, and by far the least experienced of them all. Remember him. He matters more than anyone realizes yet. And finally, 2 local guides who knew this mountain in their bones, a father and his son, both named Peter Taugwalder. So the team was a French superstar, an English vicar, 2 teenage nobles, and a father-son local duo. Basically an Ocean's 11 where half the crew has never actually done a heist. 7 men, 1 rope, 1 impossible mountain. On the morning of the 14th of July, they set out for the summit. And if you want to be on the rope for the rest of this climb, hit subscribe now, because unlike Hadow, I promise not to drag you down with me. The climb was hard, but not as hard as the mountain's reputation had promised. Hour after hour they worked upward, and the summit that had defeated Whymper 7 times began at last to give way. At around 1:30 in the afternoon, Whymper and Croz stepped onto the summit of the Matterhorn, the first human beings ever to stand there. They had done it. To prove it to the valley below, to the rival Italian team climbing from the other side, they tied a shirt to a tent pole and waved it like a flag from the top of the world. A shirt on a pole, the most triumphant moment in the history of alpinism, and the flag they planted looked like laundry day at a medieval castle. They spent an hour up there, 1 hour of pure victory. It would be the last good hour any of them would ever share, because everyone who has climbed a mountain knows the truth the tourists forget. Reaching the top is only halfway. The real danger is getting down. To descend the steepest, most dangerous section, they roped themselves together into a single chain, and the order they chose that afternoon is the whole story, so pay attention to it.
At the front, going down first, Michel Croz, the strongest guide. Behind him, the inexperienced young Haydo, then the clergyman Hudson, then Lord Francis Douglas, then the elder Taugwalder, then Whymper, and last of all, the younger Taugwalder. Croz, Haydo, Hudson, Douglas, the four at the front, tied to each other, and then that one crucial length of rope, connecting them back to the elder Taugwalder and to the two men who would live. They moved slowly, carefully, one man at a time, the others braced. This is how it's done. This is how you survive a mountain. And for a while, it worked. Croz, at the front, had turned to help Haydo, to place the young man's feet on the rock, step by step, because Haydo simply wasn't good enough to do it himself. And in that moment, Haydo slipped. He fell against Croz, who had no time to brace, and knocked him off his feet. Croz was pulled from the rock. His weight and Haydo's yanked Hudson off, and Hudson pulled Lord Francis Douglas. 4 men in a single second, torn from the mountain. Above them, the elder Taugwalder and Whymper threw themselves against the rock and held. Everything now depended on that one length of rope, on whether it would hold 4 falling men. It didn't. The rope snapped, and Croz, Haydo, Hudson, and Lord Francis Douglas fell nearly 4,000 feet down the north face. Whymper later said Croz's last word had been a single cry, "Impossible." 3 men were left alive on the mountain, and the moment the rope stopped swinging, the second story, the dark one, began. 3 survivors, 4 dead, and 1 rope that had broken clean. When they examined that rope, people noticed something. It was the wrong rope. The team had carried 3 ropes that day. 2 were strong, but the one that failed, the one tied to the 4 men who died, was the oldest, weakest rope of the lot, a thin reserve line, never meant to bear a climber's full weight, let alone 4. So the question wrote itself. Why was the weakest rope in the wrong place? Was it a fatal mistake in the chaos of the descent? Or was it a choice? Picture opening the emergency kit on the tallest mountain in the Alps and reaching past 2 good ropes for the frayed one at the bottom of the bag. It's the mountaineering equivalent of bringing a spoon to a knife fight. You really hope it was an accident. And rumors started. The elder Taugwalder, they said, had cut the rope. Some claimed he did it to save himself and his son when he realized it would never hold. Others said something crueler, that he'd cut it out of jealousy of Croz, the famous French guide who now lay dead on the glacier below. If a good mystery gives you that itch to say something out loud, hold that thought and drop your verdict in the comments. Accident or something darker? I read them. We'll come back to your theory at the end. The accusations were serious enough that the authorities opened a formal inquiry. On the 21st of July, 1865, 1 week after the tragedy, an investigation began in Zermatt. It ran for 3 days. And here is the verdict. The inquiry found no evidence that anyone had cut the rope. None. The cause of the accident, it concluded, was the slip of the inexperienced Haydo and the failure of that weak reserve rope. No charges were filed. The elder Taugwalder was cleared. On paper, it was over. Officially, there was no murder on the Matterhorn. But a verdict on paper and a verdict in people's minds are 2 very different things. Because the disaster had become the scandal of Europe, it filled every newspaper. In England, the outrage reached the throne itself. Queen Victoria is said to have considered banning her subjects from climbing altogether, and the world wanted someone to blame. And this is where the story turns, because of who got to tell it. The 2 Taugwalders could not read or write. The men who fell were dead, which left one voice to become the official version of that day, Edward Whymper's. In 1871, Whymper published his famous book about the climb, and in it he did not clear the Taugwalders. He damaged them. He described the guides after the fall as men who, in his words, cried like infants and trembled. He wrote that the elder Taugwalder in the descent had said with terrible emphasis, "I cannot." Whymper, writing the only surviving account of a disaster he was part of, is a bit like letting one player review the match, edit the footage, and hand in the ref's report. Technically, it's testimony. Practically, it's a director's cut. He didn't quite say murder. He didn't have to. He painted the survivors as weak and let the reader's imagination do the rest. His book became the truth, and for over a century, the Taugwalder family had no way to answer back. Being the guide who got everyone off the deadliest mountain in the Alps and still being treated like the villain is the historical equivalent of Ned Stark. You did the honorable thing, and the story remembered you as the problem. So let's do what a court would do. Let's look at what the evidence actually says. If a rope is cut, it shows a clean edge. If it breaks under strain, it frays and tears. And the weight of the evidence, then and since, points to a rope that failed, not a rope that was severed. A weak reserve line in the wrong place, asked to hold 4 falling men. It never could have. Modern historians have gone further. One Alpine Club scholar concluded the worst Taugwalder was ever guilty of was not paying enough attention to which rope he grabbed. And the great mountaineer Reinhold Messner suggested something sharper still, that Whymper spent the rest of his life blaming the guides to deflect from his own failure of leadership as the man who led that crime. For the rest of his life, Whymper defended himself, in lectures, in letters, in print. The mountain made him the most famous climber in the world. It also gave him something he could never outrun. Here's where the record ends, honestly. The evidence says the rope broke. The inquiry said no one cut it. The physics of a frayed, overloaded reserve line says the same. If you want the truth is almost certainly an accident, a young man's slip, a bad rope, and a fall no one could have stopped. But there's a reason this became a legend and not just a tragedy, because the one thing we can never fully recover is what happened inside those few seconds on the rock. We have Whymper's version, written years later by a man with every reason to protect himself. We have the silence of 2 guides who could not write, and we have 4 men who took the answer down the north face with them, one of whom, Lord Francis Douglas, was never found. His body is still up there, somewhere on the Matterhorn to this day. So did the rope break, or was it cut? The record says it broke. The legend refuses to let it go. And maybe that's the real story here. Not what the mountain did to 4 men, but what the survivors and the century that followed did to the ones who lived. 160 years on, we've mapped that mountain to the centimeter, and we still can't fully clear one man's name. The Matterhorn kept its summit for a few thousand years. Turns out, it's even better at keeping a secret. You made it down the mountain, which puts you ahead of most of this crew. If the dark record earned it, subscribe and ring the bell so the next cold case finds you. And tell me down in the comments, the record or the legend, which one do you believe? That's the record. Watch your footing on the way down.